In the early months of 1848, the settlement at the edge of the bay was little more than a whisper, a quiet, dusty, windswept outpost known as Yerba Buena. It was home to perhaps 800 people. It was a place of sweeping coastal winds, small adobe houses, and a few modest wooden docks jutting into the cold, gray water of the Pacific. At the time, it was the absolute edge of the continent, isolated, slow-moving, and largely forgotten by the rest of the world. But within 12 months, that quiet frontier village would be violently erased. In its place would rise one of the most sudden, chaotic, and extraordinary human migrations in recorded history, all because of a few shiny flakes discovered in the tail race of a lumber mill on the American River. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historical accounts, eyewitness diaries, engravings, and maps to life. We are going to shift our perspective, step back in time, and move through the muddy, frantic streets of San Francisco in 1849. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to feel it, to imagine what it was like to step off a ship after 6 agonizing months at sea, arriving in a city driven by a single, desperate fever, gold. And if you stick around until the end, we will stand on these same spots in the modern day to see what was buried, what was paved over, and what ghosts remain beneath the concrete of the modern city. To understand 1849 San Francisco, you first have to look at the water. This was Yerba Buena Cove. By the summer of 1849, this harbor presented one of the most surreal sights on the planet. Over 500 massive wooden sailing ships sat anchored in the bay, and almost all of them were empty. You see, getting to San Francisco was a nightmare. The Argonauts, as the gold seekers were called, faced 3 terrible choices. They could spend 6 months sailing 18,000 miles around the treacherous, freezing tip of South America at Cape Horn. They could take a ship to Central America, hike through the malaria-infested jungles of the Isthmus of Panama, and pray to catch another ship on the Pacific side. Or they could walk 2,000 miles across the Great Plains and the blistering deserts of the Overland Trail. By the time these people arrived, they were exhausted, starved, and completely consumed by gold fever. So, when ships finally pulled into Yerba Buena Cove, the crews didn't just unload the cargo. The moment the heavy iron anchors dropped into the bay, the sailors, the cooks, and even the captains abandoned their vessels. They scrambled to the shore, bought whatever supplies they could carry, and immediately rushed toward the Sierra Nevada foothills. Because there was no one left to sail them back, the ships were simply left to rot. From the hills above, the harbor looked like a dead, decaying forest of wooden masts swaying in the thick fog. But San Francisco was growing so fast, and lumber was so incredibly scarce, that the city's residents had to get creative. Some of these abandoned ships were physically dragged out of the water and onto the mudflats. Enterprising businessmen cut doors into their massive wooden hulls, built staircases up their sides, and turned them into makeshift hotels, saloons, and warehouses. The most famous of these was the whaling ship Niantic. It was intentionally run aground at the corner of Clay and Sansom streets. A hotel was built right on top of its deck. You could walk down the beach, pay an exorbitant fee, and rent a cramped, damp room inside the belly of a stranded ship. Moving away from the water, the sheer reality of the city's housing crisis became inescapable. In a single year, the population exploded from under 1,000 to over 25,000 people. It was physically impossible to build wooden houses fast enough. Instead, the city became a vast, sprawling sea of canvas. Thousands of people lived in what was known as Happy Valley, a massive tent city pitched directly in the sand, scrub brush, and mud south of Market Street. Despite the cheerful name, life here was brutal and unforgiving. The famous San Francisco fog brought a biting, damp cold that seeped into your bones. Wood smoke hung heavy and low in the air, mixing with the pungent smells of unwashed bodies, rotting garbage thrown directly into the streets, and roasting coffee. Because there was no sanitation system whatsoever, diseases like cholera and dysentery swept through the canvas tents mercilessly. Yet, every single day, hundreds more people arrived, pitching their canvas wherever they could find a square of empty dirt. In this canvas city, the economy was entirely broken by the sheer volume of gold flowing down from the mountains. Inflation was staggering. A single egg could cost $3, the equivalent of roughly $100 today. A slice of bread was $1. A simple shovel could run you $50. Nobody paid with coins or paper money. Every merchant, bartender, and landlord kept a delicate brass scale on their counter. You paid for your whiskey, your rent, or your boots with a pinch of gold dust poured directly from a leather pouch. If you walked toward the center of town, navigating the treacherous paths, you would eventually find yourself in Portsmouth Square. This was the beating, chaotic, and dangerous heart of 1849 San Francisco. Surrounding the square were the city's most famous and lavish landmarks, like the Parker House and the El Dorado Gambling Saloon. These buildings were a shocking contrast to the canvas tents. Inside, they were adorned with massive mirrors brought around Cape Horn, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings. The air was thick with cheap cigar smoke, the smell of spilled whiskey, and the relentless clinking of coins and chips. It was here that fortunes made from months of back-breaking, freezing labor in the mountain rivers were lost in a single evening over a hand of cards or a spin of the roulette wheel. The square was a collision of the entire world. You would hear English, Spanish, French, German, and Cantonese all spoken within a few feet of each other. It was a truly global city built overnight. But just outside those warm, brightly lit saloon doors was a very different reality. The mud. In the winter of 1849, the heavy rains turned the unpaved streets of San Francisco into a thick, inescapable, and surprisingly deadly soup. The mud in some intersections was so deep that horses and entire wagons frequently sank and had to be abandoned to the earth. It was said you couldn't tell if a man was drunk or just trying to walk down Montgomery Street. Pedestrians became desperate. They threw wooden planks, empty barrels, crates, brush, and even heavy sacks of ruined flour and coffee into the streets just to create makeshift stepping stones to cross from one side to the other. And with the mud and the gold came the crime. San Francisco in 1849 was virtually lawless. There was no organized police force. A neighborhood known as Sydney Town, later part of the infamous Barbary Coast, was populated by ex-convicts who had sailed over from the penal colonies of Australia. Known as the Sydney Ducks, they formed violent gangs, robbing and extorting the newly arrived miners. When the official law failed to protect the citizens took the law into their own hands, forming the Committee of Vigilance. They held their own rapid trials and conducted public hangings right in Portsmouth Square. It was frontier justice at its most raw. A city made of canvas, cheap pine, and high winds, populated by thousands of men using open flames and oil lamps, was a disaster waiting to happen, and happen it did. Between 1849 and 1851, San Francisco burned to the ground 6 separate times. The great fires would sweep through the hills, turning the canvas tents to ash and reducing the wooden saloons to glowing embers. Fire was a constant, terrifying companion. But the energy of the gold rush was so relentless, and the money was flowing so fast that the ashes would barely cool before the residents were rebuilding again. And with each fire, they learned. They stopped building with canvas and cheap wood and started importing brick, stone, and heavy iron doors. The temporary mining camp was repeatedly forcing itself into becoming a permanent, indestructible metropolis. Standing here now, looking at the pristine, modern streets of San Francisco, it is almost impossible to reconcile the towering, quiet city we know today with the muddy, frantic, and roaring outpost of 1849. But the connection is much more literal than you might think. Remember that shallow, muddy harbor? Remember Yerba Buena Cove and those hundreds of abandoned, rotting ships? As the city rapidly expanded in the 1850s, the residents realized they desperately needed more flat land. So, they began knocking down the surrounding sand dunes and pushing the earth directly into the water, filling in Yerba Buena Cove entirely. They didn't move all the ships. Many were just left where they sat, swallowed up by the dirt and sand. Today, if you walk through San Francisco's financial district, surrounded by towering skyscrapers, you are walking directly on top of those buried ships. During modern construction projects, workers still occasionally dig up the hulls of 1849 sailing vessels, resting silently beneath the concrete. The canvas tents are gone. The mud has been paved over. But the foundation of this city, literally and figuratively, was built on the madness, the ambition, and the sunken ghosts of the gold rush. Thank you for stepping back into the past with me. If there is another city, another moment in time, or a historical scene you'd like to see brought back to life, let me know in the comment. I'd love to keep building this journey with you. Until next time.